All right, so here's the final video. It'll deal with one example each of shifting AD, SRAS, and LRAS. So the original graph, based on the prompt given here where it says the graph is started at, will be at the top. The bottom will be after the scenario, which is also right here with the comic book style POW. So graph started at below long run equilibrium or at recession, because again, all three curves do not intersect. We are at a time of economic trouble in the short run. In this case, it happens to be at a recession or below full employment. So at that point, here we see Y1, which is our temporary equilibrium point, our short run equilibrium point, is below our full employment, which should be up here at YF, at GDP at full employment. So we're below it. The government decides, hey, we can try and increase spending. Let's see if that works. That's a good trick. So government increases spending, hoping that that multiplier effect will give people money, and then those people go spend money at other stores, and now the store owners have money, and there's that multiplied ripple out effect. And cool, it works. So down here, we know that government spending is a shifter of aggregate demand, because government spending is the G component of GDP out of CIGXN, SIGXN. So it is a shifter of aggregate demand. And since the government is increasing spending, that's going to shift aggregate demand to the right, because anything that increases GDP will shift aggregate demand, or increase aggregate demand will shift AD to the right. So all we do is down here on the second graph, this was our original AD. We shift it to the right. There's my little arrow to know that we're going to the right. And it shifts us out to here. I put us right back at long run equilibrium. Now, the government increased spending to get us out of a recession. And so the effect of that, which we can see on our graph, is that price level increased. We went from PL1, which is where we started, to PL2. We went from Y1, which was our short run below equilibrium output. It put us back to GDP at full employment, YF. And we also know that because GDP increases, that means, real GDP, that means we are really producing more goods and services. So if the economy is producing more goods and services, it needs to hire more workers in order to make those goods and services. So anytime real GDP increases, unemployment decreases, or vice versa. If real GDP decreases, we're making fewer things, that means workers get fired, so unemployment increases. Real GDP and unemployment have an inverse or opposite relationship. So you never need to draw two separate graphs. I just did it so I wouldn't have to have, several slides of pictures for each graph. This is where we started, and then on this same graph on a test or a quiz or a whiteboard or anything, you would just show the shift on the same graph. Again, you do not ever need to draw a second or separate graph. That's just a waste of time. So, new scenario. Here, we're starting at long run equilibrium or at full employment, because again, all three curves intersect. There's our production at full employment. We have our current price level at equilibrium. Then we have ZAP, wages, or what you pay your workers, increase. Now, we think back and say, okay, wages, well, that's not really any part of CIG or XN. Wages sounds like a supply issue, not a demand issue. So if wages increase, I know that wages can change all the time, especially those of us who work. You know that every year, or even recently, every seemingly 6 to 10 months, wages are changing. So if wages increase, we know that's a short run impact, because wages could keep increasing or they could also decrease at any point. So if wages increase, that means businesses are spending more money on workers and less money on resources and other parts of production. So that means aggregate supply will decrease or shift to the left. So again, as a result of wages or minimum wage increasing, SRAS shifts to the left. And so that's what we see on this graph down here. We started at our long run equilibrium. When we shift SRAS, it gets a little confusing because you want to shift both ranges here, the horizontal and the intermediate. That's our short run curve. And we know we need to label it here because, again, we shifted out of long run equilibrium into a point where we do not want to be. So this is, again, a short run point. So we are going to label our new equilibrium point right here, where aggregate demand intersects with our new short run curve, because, again, we do not want to stay here for long. So we will relabel this point as price level 2 and Y2, just to keep things consistent, PL2 and Y2. So what this shows us on this graph is that we started at long run equilibrium or at full employment, and then when workers got a raise, that temporarily changes aggregate supply, shifts it to the left, which leads to an increase in price level. So we have inflation and a decrease in GDP. Yikes, we're producing fewer things. So not only did prices go up, that means we're producing fewer things. And so we know how that affects unemployment, because if we're producing fewer things, that means we got to fire some workers and unemployment increases. So yikes, SRAS shifting to the left hurt us pretty bad. Things are more expensive. We're producing less. People are getting fired. Bad situation there with a leftward shift of AS in this case. Now the final one, this is the one that freaks people out the most, that you'll want to watch this, kind of pause it here and sit here and think on it for a minute afterwards, or watch some of those videos that are posted in the Google Classroom. Mr. Clifford, the AC/DC Econ guy, does a good job with these as well. Here I'm starting a graph at our recession or below full employment. Again, not all three curves are intersecting. So this is a temporary, a short run equilibrium here, where that's our price level and that is our GDP. Again, there's our gap. We are below where we should be. Boom, pow. We have a new technology is developed. Cool. New technology. Technology sounds like a supply shifter because it's something that would shift the PPC, and that means that's how much we can possibly produce. So that sounds like supply. And we know if we jump back to our notes that technology is a LRAS, a long-run aggregate supply shifter. It is not something that can sort of increase or decrease frequently. When there is an increase in technology, generally it sticks around for quite a while, or it just even continues to get better. So new technology will shift LRAS. And now this is the funky part where earlier I mentioned when we shift LRAS, we also shift SRAS with it. The reason being is because this technology doesn't just affect production in the future, it also changes or increases our production right now. So when you shift LRAS, you also shift SRAS. Again, one more time. If it is a shifter of LRAS, you shift SRAS with it. So here on our graph, we are shifting both the vertical part of LRAS, oops, and I forgot to label LRAS 2 right here, and this intermediate. If you wanted to draw the line all the way out, you could. We are shifting the long run part of aggregate supply and this short run part of aggregate supply. So it's almost like a reverse California shape. You're shifting LRAS and SRAS. And so because we got new technology, we shift it to the right because we can produce more things, which is a good thing. And then off to the side, man, total brain fart today. I should have put off to the side. As a result, now that LRAS shifted, we have LRAS, this would be SRAS, and AD all intersecting right here. So we are back at a long run equilibrium point. So we can just relabel it as PL2, so price level decreased, things are cheaper. Real GDP increased, we're producing more things, which also means if real GDP increases, that unemployment decreases. And now some of you say, well, aren't we beyond our full employment? This is a bad thing? No, because we shifted LRAS and SRAS together, this is our new maximum possible production. So if you wanted to, you do not need to, you could have labeled this like Y full employment 2, because since LRAS shifted, this is old. This first YF right here is outdated. We can actually be producing out here in the long run because of that new technology. So I've only got about 20 seconds left before it cuts me off. So that'll be my plug. Come to the review sessions this week if you have questions on this. Again, I want you to try all of that review packet or the spring break homework packet at home. Come to a review session, tweet or email with questions, and watch all those videos on Google Classroom. And Have a good break, and hopefully I'll see you this week.